Hey Donovan, I always look forward to seeing the latest video you put out. I always watch your videos on my lunch break at work. I'm obsessed with anything to do with the paranormal, and I have been since I had this experience as a kid. My dad was driving and I was in the passenger seat. We were going to visit my grandparents for the weekend, something we used to do about twice a month. It was about a 2-hour drive up the Wyoming mountains surrounded by beautiful views and heavy woods. I always look forward to it because my dad and I could get some quality time together. On this night it was very dark and a little foggy. My dad and I were making good time when we saw a man standing in the middle of the road. As we got closer, we realized that the man was completely naked. He was bald and didn't have any hair on his entire body. "Damn meth heads," my dad said, something he said quite often. On top of being completely naked, the man looked weird. He had no expression on his face and was very pale. He started walking towards the car and it made my dad and I uncomfortable. As he got closer, I saw the eyes were completely black. Not dark, I mean black and beady. Something was definitely not right about this guy. As the man got closer, my dad put the car in reverse and was going to drive by him and continue down the road. As we started driving backwards, the man started running at us. My dad floored it and the scariest thing happened. The man dropped on all fours and ran at us at a crazy speed. He was salivating all over his face, and his neck kept popping back disturbingly as he ran. As soon as there was a little distance between us, my dad slammed on the brakes, put the car in drive, and swerved around whatever was chasing us. The creature dove towards the car and got really close to my car door, but we were able to escape untouched. I will always remember its face, a short distance from my window looking at me. It was the most horrible thing I've ever witnessed. It had these nasty yellow teeth that looked really sharp, and its body was ghostly white and veiny. But the worst part is still those little black soulless eyes. I turned and asked my dad what that thing was, and he told me that's what happens when you take meth. It was a pretty quiet ride after that. We were both trying to figure out what the hell that thing was. My dad kept looking in the rearview mirror during the drive, and I know it was to make sure that that thing wouldn't get us. I mentioned to my dad that its neck moved around like crazy as it ran, and he explained that meth heads' bones deteriorate from the drug use, and it causes it to look like that. I mentioned the sharp yellow teeth, and he said that soon they will even get worse and fall out due to the drug use. I asked how he was able to run so fast on all fours, and he said that they lose strength in their legs and they must learn to run around like that. I asked why its eyes were so black, and he said that meth attacked the eyes and made people go blind. He had an answer for everything, so I just dropped it, but I never forgot about it. When we got to my grandparents, I told them all about it. I told them about its freaky eyes, bizarre teeth, and nasty skin, and how it charged us on all fours, and they told me it was just my imagination. That really hurt having loved ones accuse me of lying, but later I figured out that they were just trying to calm me down and protect me. I remember when we were heading home, I asked my dad if we were going to see the creature again, and he pretended like he didn't know what I was talking about. When I explained the creature and how it charged at us, he told me that it must have been a vivid nightmare. I knew I wasn't going crazy, and I was pissed at my dad. But being a parent now, I kinda get it. Life's tough enough as it is. Can't have your children worrying about something they can't defend themselves against. Back then, my dad blew it off, but now we talk about all the possible things it could have been. This thing definitely had a face, and a creepy one at that. We really don't know what it could have been. Everyone I've told this story to has a different opinion of what it could have been. Some have claimed it's a creature called a crawler, and that thing apparently also runs on all fours. Some people have told me that it was just an animal, and the fog made it look like a humanoid creature, which is just insulting. If I'm lucky enough for you to share my story on your channel, thank you in advance. If anyone listening to this has any ideas what this could be, please don't hesitate to share it. It would be nice to finally get to the bottom of this once and for all, and it would be really nice to share the answers with my dad the next time I see him. Donovan, I listen to your channel all the time, and I figured it was about time for me to send in this crazy experience I had. Some of the stories I've heard you read have been absolutely nuts, so maybe people won't think that I'm bad writing this to you. I've been a nurse for many years, and this happened to me shortly after I became an ER nurse. We had a patient flown in from a car wreck. He was in rough shape, broken limbs, bruises, covered in blood, and severe head trauma, you name it. We tried to save him, but he died in the operating room. They declared his time of death, and we started prepping him to get him out of there. All of a sudden, he wakes up and gasps for air. We put him under and treated him for severe internal hemorrhaging. It was honestly a miracle that he survived the surgery. Afterwards, he went into a coma, but he was still alive. A few weeks later, I went in to check on his vitals, his fluids, and all that fun stuff. I kid you not, he woke up and looked me right in the eyes and started moving. He started flailing and panicking, so I called for help. We put him back under and removed his feeding tube and everything. He stabilized a little later and was in awful shape, but he was very much alive and alert. We put him on a morphine drip, but it looked like he was on a long road to recovery. Eventually, he started to improve. He was eating regularly, and he maintained a positive outlook. He was doing pretty well. One day, I came to check on the Miracle Man. That was my nickname for him. He seemed like he was pretty good, and I was about to check on the next patient when he asked me something. Do you believe in heaven and hell? I wasn't the type to waste time on things that I couldn't understand, so I just responded, either something happens or nothing happens. Either way, we die. The next day, I checked on him again, and he brought up the same subject. He explained that he always believed in an afterlife, but now he believes in heaven and hell. I told him that if I had died on the operating table and came back to life, I might feel the same way. I saw it, he said to me. I felt it. I asked him to explain what he meant, and he said, I felt the heat. I heard the screams. I saw it. I saw hell. I tried to put him at ease and told him that he just underwent a tremendous amount of stress and probably hallucinated. His words stuck with me though. I saw him dead for several minutes. Is it possible his soul left the earth and he saw hell? He requested to be wheeled into the hospital chapel several times a day and became obsessed with what he saw and experienced. Every time I'd visit him, he'd talk about how he didn't want to go back to hell and wanted to turn his life around before it was too late. A few months later, he eventually turned a corner and improved further. He left without many complications and is still doing well. That man found God and became a minister. He felt the need to uphold something that he saw when he died, so he dedicated his life to it, to do well and to do good. We still keep in touch today, and sometimes I go to his services. Thanks for your time, Donovan. Hey Donovan, your channel has interested me for quite some time now. I have something that I rarely tell people because it's awful, and it took me years to process it. I've owned a successful pest control company for 15 years now, and I'm proud to have built it from the ground up. I started with nothing and now I have 50 employees and a near impeccable customer satisfaction rating. The incident I referred to happened to me in the first couple years when I started my business. I got a call from an elderly woman who complained about having a fly infestation. Elderly people always tug at my heart because my grandparents raised me and they didn't have a lot of money. We had cockroaches, fleas, mice, and all kinds of pests, so I can't turn the elderly down no matter how bad the job is. Fly infestations typically mean the job will be nasty. Flies breed and feed in filth like trash, feces, spoiled food, and that kind of thing. I was expecting the worst, but willing to do my best for this woman in need. I drove over to her house, and it was a nice neighborhood and looked nice from the outside. She had a nice flower garden and a white picket fence that closed in the backyard. The house was probably built in the 1950s, but it looked like it was in great shape. But you can't judge a book by its cover, so I anticipated the worst inside the house. I knocked on the door and this sweetest little old lady answered the door. She mentioned she lived alone, and it was hard for her to go up and down the stairs, so she hadn't been down there in a while. This is what I was expecting to hear, so I told her I would take care of the problem. I asked her if the problem was exclusively in the basement, and she mentioned that sometimes they come up to the main level as well. I did some light routine spraying around to deter bugs from coming up, and sprayed the outside perimeter of the house with some heavy-duty bug killer. Now it was time to go downstairs, so I got all of my equipment on. When I opened the door to the basement, I was expecting the smell to be horrendous, but it didn't have much of a smell at all, just damp and old smelling. I walked down the stairs and turned on the light to the basement. There was lots of non-perishable food, but no real smell. I kept looking around, but I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. I also didn't see a single fly. I went upstairs and told the woman I was going to check up in her attic for bugs. She insisted they were coming from the basement. I told her I wanted to cover all the bases and climbed the ladder up into the attic. The attic didn't show any signs of infestation. There was an occasional dead bug, but it was much cleaner than I was expecting. I sprayed up there just to be safe and headed down back the ladder. I told the woman I didn't see any sign of infestation, and she said that they only come up at night. Keeping in mind that she was old, I told her that I sprayed and I took care of the problem, and that if she has any other issues to let me know. That same night I got a call from the same lady. She sounded scared and kept yelling, "They're coming, they're coming." So I got in my truck and I headed over to her house. I grabbed my gear and I knocked on the front door. She yelled, "Thank God you're here," as she opened the door. She brought me over to the basement door, and sure enough, there were lots of flies gathered around the basement door. I told her to get into the other room because I was going to spray. I sprayed the flies and they all dropped dead. I opened the basement door, and all the way down into the basement there were flies buzzing all around. I sprayed as I walked down, killing all the flies. Finally, I got downstairs and it was absolutely covered in flies. I had never seen so many flies. I sprayed and sprayed until finally I had to go to my truck and refill my tank. After refilling the tank, I grabbed a vacuum as well so I could suck up all the dead flies. I made my way down the stairs, vacuuming up all the flies along the way. As I got back into the basement, I must have been vacuuming up hundreds of flies every minute. It was unbelievable. Then, all of a sudden, all the lights went out and I saw a pale white glowing girl with long black hair. She had the most wicked look in her eyes. I was in total shock and it made me yell. Then the lights came back on and she disappeared. I ran upstairs and I was going to leave, but the thought of leaving that poor old woman alone with that thing just didn't seem right. Plus, I had left all my equipment in the basement. After about 5 minutes of catching my breath, I went back downstairs, finished vacuuming the flies up, sprayed again for good measure, and told the woman I was finished. About a week later, she called me and thanked me. She said that she hasn't seen a fly since, and that she would let her friends know about my services. I hung up the phone and tried not to give it any more thought, but I'll never forget that girl's face. I don't want to give away too many personal details because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about and what will get government suits knocking on my door. The Pentagon released those UFO tapes in 2020, so none of this should be too controversial for Uncle Sam. What I will say is that I served in the United States Navy from 2015 to 2019. I spent nearly all my time in the Navy on aircraft carriers. I wasn't a pilot or anything cool like that, but I had a good time in the Navy. My best memories are from when I was part of the 7th Fleet. Yokosuka was a fun place to be stationed. At least when the sailors and the Marines there weren't doing something stupid, it was fun. The command would take away off-base privileges if we got too rowdy in town and the local authorities complained. Sometimes the Japanese could be a bit touchy about stuff. I won't mention any specific ships, but we patrolled the Pacific around Japan, China, and Indonesia, basically all around Asia and the South Pacific. Things were a little hot back then. Still are, I hear, because China keeps trying to assert its dominance in the South China Sea. Dumb things like building bases near major international shipping lanes and then claiming that part of the sea as their territorial waters. Real geopolitical pissing contest stuff. Regardless, we were always on mission. This is around 2017 and 2018. Playing chicken with the Chinese Navy, making sure they knew we didn't respect their imaginary boundaries by flying over them. We weren't looking for a fight or anything, but we always prepared like one would break out. It's standard Navy operating procedure. I was an aviation ordnanceman, AO for short, so it was my job to make sure the planes had their weapons serviced and ammo fully stocked for a firefight. The dogs with the biggest teeth fight the least, my chief always said. I was out on the carrier deck one evening, loading some ordnance onto a recently returned jet, when I heard some chatter on the comms. My headset was a bit crappy, so I couldn't get some of it, but I saw a yellow shirt, the guy who waves the jets in, looking up into the sky intently. I asked the yellow shirt what was up, and he said one of our pilots saw something weird in the air. I was a little jumpy when I heard that. We were close to the disputed border. I figured China launched a few planes of their own to test out our nerve. I didn't want to be part of an international incident. The pilot was circling the ship at different altitudes. I could make out over the comms that he was searching for something that dropped off his radar. This went on for a while. Eventually he was ordered to land and refuel. I didn't know the pilot, but I'd seen him around the chow hall in the gym. He had a pretty heavy deadlift, so I noticed him before. I went over to his plane and checked on his armaments. I knew they were good because my buddy Ryan worked the day shift and his crew put them on, but I wanted to get close enough to hear what the pilot was saying to the yellow shirt. It's crazy loud on the flight deck, so you have to be right on top of people to hear them. The pilot didn't say much, just that he had caught something on his radar that was moving strangely, not like a jet, not even obeying basic physics. That was creepy. Maybe a new kind of Chinese drone. Top brass must have liked the idea even less than me, because we dropped anchor and stayed put for another 3 days. We had to work port and starboard, meaning half the... But on the third night of anchor, I saw something that I know human technology cannot do. I was on the flight deck checking the missiles on a jet when an extremely bright bluish light flooded the sky. It was so harsh that we couldn't look at it, but it somehow still illuminated everything perfectly evenly. The strangest thing about it was how the light looked blue, silver, or green depending on what angle you looked at it. The light shot backwards and then up in a zigzag pattern. It didn't accelerate or slow down between maneuvers. It stopped and started like inertia and air resistance didn't exist. It moved like a giant invisible hand was just jerking it around in the sky, like a kid playing with a toy airplane. The light was still for a few minutes, and then slowly circled the carrier deck in a wide arc. It was about a quarter of a mile away, but the light was easy to spot. Our comms gear was going wild. I could hear snippets of voices trying to give us orders, but a metallic humming blocked any coherent messages from getting through. A green shirt finally pieced enough of the message together to know they wanted us to launch every available jet that was currently on deck. We launched the first plane as fast as we could, and I watched it take off and bank wide left to approach the humming blue-silver-green light. I don't think anyone on flight deck was breathing as the plane approached. When the jet got within a few hundred yards, the light just dropped out of the sky like it was a puppet whose strings were cut. We all ran to the edge of the deck, but there was no splash or sound of impact. The light was just gone. For 4 more days, we worked continuously to launch and land planes, searching every inch of ocean for a sign of that strange aircraft. I even heard they pulled one of our ballistic submarines from their post to search the seabed. They never touch the submarines for anything. They are our greatest nuclear deterrent. We spent another 2 days in debriefing rooms where they told everyone on deck and the control tower who saw the incident to keep our mouths shut. They used legal language, of course, but the message was the same. Not sure if this is still supposed to be hush-hush, with the release of all those UFO videos, but I thought it was time I share my personal experience. If anyone from the government reads this, my name is John Smith. When I was a kid, I used to live in Salem, Massachusetts. I don't know if you know anything about that area, but it's definitely associated with a lot of strange history. We lived near the Chestnut Street district, which has some of the oldest houses in the country. We didn't have one of those fancy mansions like in the actual district. Our house had quite a few rooms, but it really needed some attention. I really loved that house though. It had a tall staircase with the best banister to slide down, and it had these cool French double doors with a lot of square panes of glass. There was a clawfoot tub in the upstairs bathroom. I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was really happy there, but for some reason, I didn't feel comfortable in my room at night. I'd be trying to fall asleep, and I would seem to sense someone circling around my bed. Usually when I opened my eyes, I wouldn't see anything, but a couple of times, I thought I saw this woman sitting at the bottom of my bed holding a child. She just sat there staring at the child in her lap. It didn't seem very old, maybe 3 or 4. It seemed to have dark splotches on its arms and legs. It looked like it was wearing a bonnet. But the apparition, or whatever it was, seemed really faint, just shadowy, and it seemed to come in and out of focus. And like I said, it only happened a few times. But the feeling of discomfort I had was often there. I would feel too warm and want to kick off my blankets, but I was too afraid to uncover myself. I would call out for my mom and dad. They would come up to see what was wrong, but I seemed to know that they wouldn't believe me if I told them, so I always complained that something hurt. Then, one of them would usually stay with me until I fell asleep. My brother slept in a bed next to me in the same room. He never seemed to notice anything, but he was a lot younger. I spent most of my time outside. My mom didn't like any of the neighborhood kids to come in the house. She was really fussy about anybody making a mess, and she really didn't want to have to provide them with any snacks or drinks. They would come fetch me to play by standing at the front window with their faces pressed against the glass. When I noticed them, I would go out to play. They knew better than to knock on the door or ring the doorbell. She didn't really care much for other children. I was allowed to roam all up and down the block. I was even allowed to go to the candy store on the corner. Well, to me, it was a candy store, but I bet it was a store for all kinds of things. I would choose my candy, and then if I had enough money left over, I would always buy one of those little pinwheels. I would blow on it and make it spin all the way home, and then I would plant it in the rose garden in the backyard. I had gotten quite a collection of them. The rose garden was one of my favorite things about that old house. It was planted in a circular brick border and had the old-fashioned kinds of roses, the ones that smell so sweet. There were 4 or 5 kids in the neighborhood that I was good friends with. When the weather was warm, we would walk to kindergarten together in the morning. We were in the same class, so we were usually on the same page as to the games we liked to play and the songs we liked to sing. One afternoon, we were in my backyard together. That morning at school, we had been playing Ring Around the Rosies. My rose garden seemed to remind us of the song, so we joined hands and started to circle around singing the song. We went around a few times and fell down laughing. About the 3rd time, as we were all getting up, something really weird happened. All of the pinwheels around the roses started spinning so fast. There wasn't any wind. It was hot and sunny. We stared at the pinwheels, and honestly, it felt really creepy. We stopped the game, and then everybody just kind of wandered off home. I went inside and went to the living room to find something to do. I had just sat down on the floor when I noticed someone at the front window with their face against the glass. I thought that was weird since we had just left each other. I stood up to see who it was, and it was the child from my room, the one with the bonnet and the splotches on its skin. I ran out of there fast. My mother didn't know what I was talking about, especially as the child was gone when we went back. But I was the most scared I had ever been. As an adult, I researched the history of that house. I discovered that one of the original inhabitants was a woman who had fled England to escape the bubonic plague, and her child had died from it. I also discovered that the roses rhyme came from the plague that affected London in the year 1665. The rhyme seems innocent, but it has a dark meaning. Those roses stand for deadly rashes. The posies were supposed to prevent the illness, and the tissues imitated sneezing symptoms. And the implication of everyone falling down is, well, death. I don't even blame anyone if they don't believe this story. I wouldn't believe it either if it hadn't happened to me. Hell, my ex-girlfriend was there too, and she still doesn't believe it. I guess introductions are in order. My name is Chase, and I'm a 21-year-old college student from Fresno. During the pandemic, I met a nice girl from Oregon named Presley online, and we really hit it off. After a year of talking and Skype calling, we decided it was finally time to meet in person. Instead of just getting together for a weekend at one or the other of our places like normal people would do, we decided to take a cross-country road trip together before classes started back in the fall. What could go wrong? Apparently everything. Well, I could write a novel on all of the horrors we encountered before reaching New York, including bad Airbnb experiences, a flat tire, and multiple arguments. Our night in New York was the biggie. My mother always told me never to talk bad about a woman, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Presley's personality in person was much different than the girl I thought I had come to know online. Nothing impressed her, but I tried my hardest to show her a good time anyway. By the time we got to New York, things between us looked pretty rocky. She had already called home crying and talked to her mother at least 3 times, and had even gone as far as saying that she might catch a plane in Maine and not make the return drive with me. Despite our struggles, I really didn't want to wind up broken up before our relationship had a chance to gain footing in the real world. I did a quick search from the bathroom at a gas station and found information on the Falling Waters Preserve in rural New York. The photos made it look crazy romantic, and I thought if anything was going to save us, it'd be that place. It was a little more difficult to find than I expected though, and she got pretty annoyed with me getting us lost out in the middle of nowhere without telling her where we're going. By the time we got there, it was dark. You couldn't even really see the falls. We were just out in the dark woods for nothing. She headed off down the trail ahead of me, slapping mosquitoes away the whole time. I started following behind her, but then got distracted by this strange sound. It's hard to describe exactly what it sounded like. It was almost like the sound you hear when you pull zip ties tight, and it just kept going. Then there was a sound of rustling in the branches all around me. "Presley?" I called out. It didn't seem like she was in the prank-playing mood, but I was hoping that it would be her rustling around in those bushes trying to scare me. Any alternative was too horrifying to think about. I didn't hear anything. Whatever it was stopped moving. It was just making these clicking sounds. She didn't call back to me, so I thought maybe I was just freaking out over nothing. Maybe it had just been a rabbit or a squirrel. Rodents sometimes make funny noises, right? I continued down the path towards the car, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something white move very quickly beside me in the woods. I turned and looked, and there, looking at me face to face, was the ugliest creature I had ever laid eyes on. I'm 5'10", and I'd venture a guess that if this thing stood up straight, it would have been about as tall as me, but it was down on all fours with its back leg joints inverted like a dog. Then I started backing away slowly, trembling in my boots. It opened up its wide mouth, revealing these razor-sharp dog-like teeth, and a long tongue that unrolled from its mouth as it screeched. Then it took off running away from me through the woods in a flash. I turned and ran straight back to the car myself, and found Presley sitting in the front seat waiting impatiently. I started the car, frantically telling her about everything that had just happened. She barely looked up from her phone at first. When I finished the story though, she turned to give me this disbelieving look and asked, "Why would you make something up like that?" I started to say, "Exactly, why would I?" Needless to say, Presley caught a plane home the next morning and hasn't spoken to me since. She thinks I just made the entire thing up. I know what I saw though, and I did not make this up. Hi Donovan, I have something absolutely terrifying to share. This happened 3 months ago behind my house in Kittanning, PA. I had a few friends over on a Saturday evening, and we were all hanging out in my backyard having a cornhole tournament. I recently got really into cornhole, and so did a few of my friends, so now we play every chance we get. I've spent so much money on the different kinds of bags you wouldn't believe. Anyways, it's about 8 p.m. and we had been playing for a few hours and having some drinks, when we started hearing this really weird noise coming from the back of my property. We were playing under the lights because I have this big old spotlight in my backyard, so we can play late at night. Now I'm a hunter and so are a lot of my friends, and we all hear this noise and no one recognizes what it could be. I don't even know if I could describe it, but imagine a bullfrog mixed with a gorilla. I know that sounds batshit crazy, but that's the best I can describe it. I know it doesn't make any sense, and we felt the same way, but we kept hearing it, so my one buddy John thought it was a good idea to go into the woods and see if we can find what's making this sound. There were 4 of us who decided to go looking, and I grabbed a spotlight and we set off into the woods. Now, when we were playing cornhole, it sounded like this thing was maybe 40 or 50 yards away, as best as I could tell. We're in the woods about where I thought it was coming from, and now the sound is even further away. So we go further in and the sound is moving like it's either trying to get away from us or trying to bait us for a trap. Well, it was certainly the latter, because what happened next is why we don't play cornhole at my house anymore. My friend John shouts out to the group, "Hey, look over by that tree." We see this thing because I don't know what else to call it. This yellowish, hairless creature standing behind the tree with its claws wrapped around the front of the tree like it was hugging it. As soon as John said that, this thing jumps out from behind the tree and starts making these crazy sounds which sound like it's coming from the back of its throat. It had this rectangular head and very deep-set eyes that were glowing red. Its mouth looked like it had 3 or 4 rows of teeth. It looked like it could bite through an arm or leg if it got a hold of one. Its veins were also bulging all over its body. Just writing about it makes me kind of sick. It was also pretty tall, maybe a foot taller than us, but it was kind of thin but muscular. My friend Will, who is always carrying, thank God, pulled out his 9 and shot at this thing 3 times but missed. It moved as soon as he reached for his weapon. It moved so fast like it could sense what was going to happen before it occurred. That was the last we saw it. It just took off after Will shot at it. I was at a loss on what to do. I didn't report anything to the police because I don't know what to say. We go to John's house now for cornhole, and we all carry all of the time. I was renting my house, but I found another place. I don't want to live somewhere where that thing is lurking my backyard. What on God's green earth could this have been? My friends think it escaped from some facility near my old place. There was this warehouse there that no one really knew what went on there. It's all fenced in too, and really out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't even know it existed until one of my buddies showed it to me on Google Maps. I don't know if they're running some crazy genetic experiments back there, or this thing came from another dimension or underground. But one thing is for sure, I don't want to run into it again. Thanks, Daryl. Hey Donovan, I would normally keep this type of encounter to myself, but I've really come to enjoy your show and the way you treat everyone with dignity. I don't look for trouble or drama, you know what I mean? When I got my new truck camper rig set up, I just wanted to get into the woods and soak up the peace and quiet, especially considering all the freaking problems I had to work out to get the whole thing up and running. My first trip was heading out west to the Umpqua National Forest to get some relief from this insane heat we've been having. I got to know this guy on the internet who was always talking about these incredible crystals he was finding. They were unbelievable. Stuff you'd see at gem shows for some serious money. He was digging them out of the earth. Me and my brother were always rock hounding when we were kids. I love how you can find spectacular things for free if you know where to look. It took me a couple 10-hour driving days, but me and my dog Jack made it to Grants Pass, Oregon, and got a hold of Patrick, you know, the internet guy. He was going to get me set up with a boondocking spot near Myrtle Creek, about an hour up north. We met up at the diner there for coffee. Patrick looked like some kind of forest sprite with his green eyes and intense hair. He was shy and seemed out of place in town. He told me he knew places in the woods that most people were unaware of. Because of his hobby of planting baby fir trees, he got really into the thick of things out there. He was driving this all beat up station wagon with the back half of the roof caved in. I followed him out of town until we accessed this creekside dirt road. Then we just kept heading west until we were surrounded by these enormous trees everywhere. I'm telling you, Donovan, they were enormous. And it was like nothing had ever been there until we arrived. And besides the sound of the river, it was dead silent. You'd think with all those trees you would hear a bird or two. Not one bird sound did I hear. Patrick showed me a spot of level ground where I could park the camper and get settled in. He took a tool roll out of the back of the station wagon and unrolled it onto the ground. There were hammers and chisels and safety goggles and headlamps and other things in there. He seemed to know what he was doing. He pulled 2 hooded black vinyl ponchos out of his backpack and whispered that I should put one on. That seemed weird to me. There wasn't any rain, but he whispered that it would keep us more concealed. I didn't understand, but I didn't argue. It was so shadowy and quiet. I already felt concealed from everything, but something about that place wouldn't even let you speak out loud. He was going to take me to one of his favorite spots upstream in exchange for me helping him list and sell his findings. I got Jack leashed up and ready to go, then Patrick said it wasn't safe to bring the dog. Not safe? What did that mean? It was strange, but it was like Patrick was someone you didn't question. Like, why are we wearing ponchos? Why can't the dog come? Why is your car bashed in? I staked Jack out on his leash and we headed into the brush beside the river. Once you got in there, you could see a faint path. It was evening and I was kind of hungry and feeling grungy and sticky from sweating through my last 2 days of driving. But I knew Patrick had limited time and this was really a rare opportunity to have such an experienced guide. The stream was really rushing along, but then we came to this spot where it widened out and partially flowed into a shallow cave. Patrick pointed at the cave like that's where we're supposed to go. We put on the headlamps and headed into the cave. It stunk. It smelled like an unwashed human had been living in there for weeks. But obviously we were pretty far off the beaten path, so I didn't know what to think. When Patrick started digging at the water's edge, right away he started uncovering these gorgeous crystals. I was stunned. How could something like that be so close to the surface? I dug in and felt like I was in a dream with these perfect specimens I was unearthing. The beauty and the odor really didn't go together. I was immersed in my search. It was so dark and quiet. Then crash! Into the mouth of the cave burst my dog Jack. He was yelping and howling and tearing at my poncho like he was possessed. He looked like a cat with all of his hair standing on end. He dragged and dragged at me, pulling me towards the cave's opening. And then I heard the most unearthly whooping sound, and this stench became truly unbearable. Rocks started raining down at the opening of the cave. Jack was all wild-eyed. All I could do was succumb to his pulling me outside. It was chaos everywhere. Rocks and water and mud and howling, and then suddenly my vision was filled with this brown hairy mass of this like 10-foot tall creature. It howled and swiped at me and I ran. I followed Jack blindly out of that hell pit and didn't stop until I got us both into the truck and locked the doors. Patrick followed shortly and slammed himself into his car and took off. I was stunned. Barreling out of those woods, I was unable to make sense of anything. My 30-pound dog had ripped his stake out of the ground to come find me and save me from this thing. Later on, I was reading about Bigfoot sightings in that area and wishing I had known that sooner. Some people even said they had used pheromones to tempt him out of hiding. I'm sure I was emitting some pretty ripe emanations that day after my lack of showering, but holy cow, I have no words. I am not looking for any trouble. Hey Donovan, I'm a psychology student at Temple University. I'm a big fan of your show and follow a lot of cryptid channels. I'm fascinated by how the human mind sees monsters in the shadows, but I've never been a big believer in the existence of legendary animals or the supernatural. However, this summer I had my own strange encounter that is making me rethink my past assumptions. I've gone over the encounter again and again in my head, and no amount of rationalization or psychological theories can explain the physical evidence I encountered. I want to tell myself that I didn't see anything supernatural, just a mundane animal that my adrenaline-fueled mind saw as demonic. But I was not alone in this encounter, and the person with me described what I saw in perfect detail. I admit I was terrified by what I saw, but the scholar in me is persistent, and I made sure to have her write down what she saw before we spoke about it. I didn't want to risk talking about it first and tainting each other's memories of the event. Sorry if I sound like a nerd, but This is why I listen to cryptozoology podcasts and YouTube channels in the first place, to understand human psychology. I guess I should give you some backstory. I was at a party 2 months back, at a friend of a friend's house in West Philly. I met a cute girl from Drexel who was an engineering major, and we hit it off. It came out in the conversation that she was big into backpacking and wanted to hike the entire Appalachian Trail after she graduated. I grew up camping a lot and being in the outdoors, so I offered to go backpacking with her sometime. Looking back, that is a little creepy to offer to take some girl you just met out into the woods all alone, but she was all for it, so we made plans to go the following weekend. I'm not from Philly, so I don't really know the area, but I heard the New Jersey Pine Barrens weren't too far, and they were known for being a vast range of wilderness, and I wanted to impress her. A casual hike on a crowded trail didn't seem like enough. So we headed to South Jersey for what I hope would be a cool experience in the Pine Barrens. It was awkward at first, just the two of us alone. There was no one else to chime in when the conversation lagged, but I thought it was still going well. We were about 3 miles into the hike when I noticed this strange smell. It was like someone had just lit off fireworks in the area. There was a sulfurous haze hanging in the air. She wrinkled her nose up and she smelled it too. She walked past me to get away from the smell, but she jumped back with a yelp. She looked at me wide-eyed and nodded to the trail behind her. A torn-up deer carcass was in the path. I could see drag marks in the sandy soil. It looked like something had purposely dropped the body there. I assume we scared off whatever predator, maybe bears or coyotes, from their kill when we got close. We walked another few miles and made our camp. Our plan was to walk to a different trail that looped back to where we parked in the morning. She brought a small tent, and it was summer, so I didn't bother bringing my own. I just tied a tarp up over me in case it rained and set my sleeping bag down. She probably would have let me in the tent, but I didn't want to presume anything. I slept for a few hours, but then something woke me up. My skin was prickling like I was in dry desert heat. The sulfur stench we smelled near the mutilated deer carcass was in the air again, but this time it was stronger. My nose and throat felt irritated like I was breathing in smoke. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw this shape at the edge of the clearing. The shape was large. It had this long horse-like head and a thin neck. I didn't see much of its body because I was distracted by its intense red eyes. My date peeked her head out of her tent and asked if I smelled the sulfur. She followed my gaze to the creature by the tree and gasped. It screeched and leapt into the air and spread these bat-like wings. As it flew away, it smashed into this tree branch about 20 feet up. We both looked at each other like, what in the hell is going on? I wanted to abandon all my things and started hiking back to the car right then and there, but we both knew that we couldn't make it in the dark. We didn't sleep well the rest of the night, and I eventually went into her tent. I didn't want to be out there just under my tarp if this thing came back. Not that the tent could protect us, but at least it keeps you hidden. At first light, we got up to leave. On the way out, we saw the branch it broke on the ground, and it also left this indent on the soil where the creature took off. I haven't went camping since, but that girl that I dated is now my girlfriend. Thanks for listening to my crazy story. I'm a doctor, and I'm constantly at the hospital working day and night. Honestly, I see strange things all the time, and must shrug it off and keep working. But there is one experience that will always haunt me. If you ask me publicly if I believe in anything that hasn't already been proven with science, I'd say no. But your channel has given me an opportunity to talk about something that has deeply confused me. I was checking on a patient who was experiencing chronic headaches. She kept chanting that they were in control. I had the nurse administer her some pain meds and recommended she be sent to the psych ward. She had no opposition to her recommended treatment, but was adamant that she didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her who they were, she told me that they were reptile demons, and that they were going to harvest her soul if she wasn't careful. She said that they had been tormenting her for years, and that she'd been trying to fight them off, but they were too strong. I tried to comfort her and assure her that we would take care of her, but she pleaded with me not to leave her alone. I spoke with the nurses and we decided to keep a close eye on her and have someone always stay close to her. We also increased her pain medication to help ease her symptoms. I kept in touch with her over the next few days and she seemed to be improving a lot. She wasn't as agitated and was starting to relax quite a bit. The nurses reported that she hadn't been having any strange or out of the ordinary hallucinations recently. She even started to develop some relationships with some of the other patients in the psych ward. It's possible whatever was causing her headaches was also causing the hallucinations, but without further testing, we couldn't say for sure. I advised her to continue taking the pain medication and to let the nurse know if she started experiencing any more hallucinations or if her headaches worsened. One day I was walking by her room and I saw these menacing shadows on the wall next to her bed. It made me stop and walk backwards to confirm what I was seeing. What I saw next gives me chills to this day. A lizard creature looked at me right in the eyes. It was almost 7 feet tall and its skin looked scaly and shiny. It had these huge claws and yellow cat-like eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I tried to run, but it felt like my feet were glued to the floor. The last thing I remember before passing out was its forked tongue flicking in and out of its mouth. When I came to, the nurses were gathered around my bed with concerned looks on their faces. They asked me what happened, and all I could do was tell them to check on that patient's room. A security guard later explained to me that the patient was nowhere to be found, and her sheets were ripped to pieces and covered in blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again, and we had to call her family and explain that she had left the building and that we were actively looking for her. To this day, the family is still searching for her, but my intuition tells me that nobody will ever see her again. Did the reptile demon succeed in harvesting her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she lost her mind, scratched herself furiously, ran out of the hospital, and who knows where she is now. But my intuition tells me that the reality is downright unexplainable. I keep trying to tell myself that I simply saw the reptile demon because my patient had mentioned it earlier and I hallucinated. I keep trying to tell myself that I worked too many hours, saw some strange things that weren't there, and collapsed from exhaustion. That's how I experienced it. I can still make out every detail of that lizard creature. I haven't even told my spouse that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. My nephew showed me an episode of your show on YouTube, and that's why I'm writing to you today. Do I really think there are lizard people out there roaming around? Absolutely not. It simply just sounds too absurd to me. Do reptilians exist in any capacity? No, the only reptiles are simply that, reptiles. Did I see the lizard creature in my patient's room? Undeniably, yes. That's why it bothers me even so much even today. Everything I know and believe tells me that what I saw I shouldn't have seen. But I remember it like it was yesterday, and now when people share their paranormal experiences, my ears perk up. I feel it necessary to include that I'm not on any medication, and wasn't on any at the time of my encounter with what my patient referred to as the reptile demon. Now, of course, I haven't seen anything like that before or after that event, and I don't expect to see anything this strange ever again, but the hospital has never felt the same to me since. My patients are always sharing the craziest stories with me of what goes on in their rooms, and I want to share my experience with them and to let them know that they aren't crazy. But I never will, though. If I was in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I wouldn't hesitate to find another doctor. Maybe someday we'll be able to share our personal experiences and not live in fear of what others might think. Until then, I'll keep listening to your channel with conflicting emotions and try to keep an open mind. I've never written into a show before, but the experience I had is keeping me up at night. I'm hoping if you read it, someone will say something in the comments, like they've heard of this or maybe even seen one themselves. I live near Franconia Notch in New Hampshire. I'd prefer not to say the actual town name, but it's a pretty small town, a Christian community. I'm afraid of what my neighbors would say if I told them I saw this thing on my property. We have black bears here and they're always getting in your trash cans. I've even seen a young black bear robbing birdseed from my bird feeder. So when I kept finding my cans overturned, I felt pretty strongly that bears were the culprit. I don't believe in shooting animals. I don't own a gun. When I see bears near the house, it's usually enough to go out with a couple of frying pans and clang them together. Unless you get between a mother and her cubs. Bears around here at least are pretty easy to scare off. Where I live is pretty far from any real city, and there's not much reflected light. It gets really dark, but the upside is you can see a lot of stars. Since I was having trouble with my trash cans, I installed some of those motion sensor lights on the back of my house. A few weeks ago, I was settled in front of the TV in my living room, watching the 11 o'clock news, when the motion sensor lights came on, and I heard a trash can get knocked over. So I scrambled up and ran into the kitchen to grab a couple of saucepans. Then I rushed out to the back door to catch the bears in the act. I figured if I could do this a few times and make a lot of noise right when they were scrounging the cans, they'd associate the unpleasant sound with the act and maybe find someone else to bother. But when I got out on my back porch, I didn't see any bears. The lights were blazing and I scanned the yard, but all I saw was overturned trash cans. There were bags on the ground that had spilled out, but nothing had been torn open. I figured when the lights came on, the bear took off. At least that's what I thought at the time. I wasn't wearing shoes, but I knew I'd better toss the bags back in and secure the lid, or the raccoons would come by and make a mess. I stepped back into the kitchen and put on my wellies, then tromped out into the yard. I bent down to pick up one of the bags, but then I noticed the black plastic had beads of moisture on it. It hadn't rained for a few days, and I was pretty sure inside of the can was dry. I was about to pick it up, but I was kind of grossed out, wondering if the animal, the bear or the raccoon, had urinated on it. I sniffed the air, but I didn't smell anything. I decided to play it safe and walked around to the side of the porch where I keep a pair of latex gloves. I was rummaging through the shelves on the porch looking for the gloves, when the backyard light timed out since I wasn't in the yard. It was annoying since now I had no illumination to help me find the gloves, but I found them a few minutes later without having to go back inside and get a flashlight. I stepped back onto the grass and headed through the side yard to the back, where the trash cans were. When I got to the corner of the house, the motion detector kicked in, and the floodlights came back on. What I saw stopped me in my tracks, my blood running cold. It defied explanation. There was a creature like nothing I've ever seen before, crouched over the trash bags. It had almost a human form, except it was really gone, and the head was elongated. It was completely naked and hairless, even its head, and its skin was kind of a weird pale color. It was crouched down on all fours like an animal. I didn't know what I was seeing. My mind just couldn't process it. I gasped and the thing looked up. Its face was absolutely terrifying. Big, black, oval-shaped eyes, no nose at all. Its mouth was just this open black pit. I think it saw me watching it because it suddenly made this weird clicking sound. I stumbled back, too afraid to even run, and this thing scooted away, super fast. It was like a blur, it was so fast, on all fours the whole time. The yard lights were still on, and I could see it now crouched on the side of the garage. When I say crouched on the side of the garage, I mean literally it was defying gravity, crouched on all fours, somehow clinging to the side wall of my garage. My eyes were glued to it. I was too afraid to turn my back on it. I was so scared I felt like I was going to pass out. It skittered away and suddenly it was on the roof of the garage. The way it moved was almost the most frightening aspect. It was there and then it was somewhere else. Then the light yards went out because I had stayed motionless for a few minutes, and then the thing was out of range. So for a split second, I'm in the absolute darkness with this creature. I took 2 tiny steps forward and then the lights came back on. Thank God. I looked at the roof, but it was gone. It was several more minutes before I was brave enough to move towards the backyard, but I knew if I didn't move, the lights would go out again. I had to come out to the back door, and that was the only door that was unlocked. I didn't see it again. I got back inside the house and locked the doors and the windows. I left the garbage can overturned on the grass, and the bags right where they lay. Raccoons and bears were the least of my worries. I haven't got a decent night of sleep since that incident. Well, that's my story. I'll be curious to know if anyone else has ever seen this creature, and if they have any more information about it. I hope it never comes back. I can't even make myself go outside at night anymore. My grandfather had something really strange happen to him when he was 7 years old. He was playing in the backyard and was suddenly overwhelmed by the smell of rotting garbage, or something decomposing. He decided to investigate and started poking around at the edge of the woods that bordered the yard. Grandpa moved branches and the foliage with a long stick, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Both of his parents had told him many times not to go in the woods alone, but the smell got stronger and the curiosity pushed him into the trees. He stepped carefully, sure that he was close to a dead raccoon or possum and not wanting to step on it. Grandpa kept going, and in just a few minutes he came to a small clearing that he didn't recognize. The smell of rotted garbage was so thick that he was nearly choking. But that wasn't the weirdest part. Directly in the middle of the clearing was something that definitely did not belong. When he told me the story, he described it as a silver Rubik's Cube, and it was 4 or 5 stories high. The outside was covered in what Grandpa's 7-year-old brain identified as armor of some kind that glowed a bit where the sunlight was hitting it. It was completely smooth, and there was a walkway of some kind leading down to the ground. Standing at the bottom of the walkway were 2 figures that looked mostly human, except for their weird clothing and elongated heads. It looked like they had been waiting for him. Once they spotted him looking at them, they started beckoning at him, waving him closer with hands that only had 3 long fingers. They were wearing what looked like what my grandfather identified as work clothes, some kind of overall or jumpsuit that looked like they were made out of the same material as rain boots. They were taller than Grandpa, but definitely not giants. Grandpa couldn't help himself. He started walking towards them. He said that it felt like an invisible rope was pulling him closer, step by step. He wasn't afraid at all, just insanely curious about what was inside that shiny cube. By now, he had decided that these figures must be aliens. He'd seen them in his older brother's science fiction magazines, and he knew that they came from the far reaches of the galaxy. But his older brother had told him that all of this. The trio started walking down the hallway. The aliens were chattering away with each other in a series of chirps and clicking sounds. But Grandpa didn't think they were trying to talk to him. He did take a moment to wonder why he wasn't scared. A year earlier, a little boy had disappeared from the small town where my grandfather's family lived. So he'd received many lectures about avoiding strangers and the danger of going off with someone he didn't know. He knew this wasn't what his parents had in mind during those conversations. But who could have possibly imagined this? Grandpa didn't see any stairs or doors on their long walk. He wanted to see the place where the aliens flew the ship. He also didn't see anything that hinted towards the cause of the rotten smell, so realized it must have been coming from the aliens themselves. The taller alien finally stopped in front of a portion of the wall that looked exactly like the rest to my grandfather's eyes. He reached inside of his jumpsuit and pulled out a card, which he waved in front of the wall, and then it slid open. And that is when Grandpa started to get a bit nervous. It looked like a doctor's office, with a table in the middle of a large room. There were some machines clustered around the table, but more alarmingly, there were 8 more aliens standing there. They stood in a line with their hands clasped in front of their bodies. The 2 accompanying my grandfather each grabbed one of his little arms, but they didn't have to drag him to the table because his feet were still moving under some other power. He walked right to the table, and then stepped up on the little stool that seemed to be there for just that purpose. Grandpa sat on the edge of the table, his legs dangling over the side. What was going to happen? Would they hurt him? Would they take them back to their planet? Would he ever see his family again? One of the aliens approached, chirping softly. It slowly reached out a hand and patted my grandfather on the head. And then it pulled a giant pair of scissors out of nowhere. My grandfather finally started yelling, and that was the last thing he remembered. When he woke up, he was lying in his own backyard, just a few yards from the porch. He could hear his mother yelling in the house, saying that it was time for everyone to get up for the day. It was chilly and his head and feet were really cold. He ran his hands over his body, but nothing hurt or seemed out of place. Grandpa reached up his hand to his scalp and found that his hair was completely cut away in some places. And that is where the story ended. When I asked him what happened next, he just said, "I got in trouble for cutting my own hair." He never told his parents about any of it because he didn't want to get yelled at for going into the woods alone. Howdy, Donovan. I love your content, and I always wondered if I'd see anything like the folks that write into your channel. Well, by the grace of God, I think I might have. I'm a long-haul trucker covering all across the United States, from Maine to California and back again. I have a few routes that take me through the mountains, deserts, and forests. Just about anywhere you can think of, I've driven through it. It's a solitary life out on the road, and I don't get to see my family and friends nearly as much as I'd like to. I sure miss them and try to call them as often as I can, but the time zone changes and the odd hours can make it difficult. So, like any good trucker, I find ways to entertain myself. In particular, I enjoy calling out on my CB radio. My handle is Big Blue, and I've made quite a few friends out on the road using this little radio. It broadcasts only in a short radius, about 20 miles if the connection is good, and only around 3 miles if there's a big mountain range or something in the way. Well, usually I get a pretty good connection. There's usually always someone out there chattering about politics or reality TV or traffic jams. I like to chat with my fellow drivers about their lives, their kids, and so on. It's not too tough to find something in common with them, and I always point out the police stops and the road closures and weather conditions. I started noticing this phenomenon a while back, and I'm just now piecing together what I believe could be interesting for you. Each time I drive through a little town in Oklahoma on my Midwestern route, I'd get odd sounds coming through my CB radio. The first time it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Well, maybe nails on a chalkboard if the chalkboard was underwater and the nails were from a panther. I don't know. It was unlike anything I've ever heard before. And really, there's not much going on there. They've got a pharmacy and a movie theater and a McDonald's, and that's about it. It used to be booming with some factory work, but I guess that business moved out and left the town pretty stranded. There's got to be only a couple hundred people living in the entire county, so the area is pretty desolate. The only special thing about this spot are these sounds that come through the radio. I don't know why it seems so special to me, only that I never heard anything like that. The second time I drove through, the sound changed. It was like a beeping noise or a dial-up telephone. And then it sounded like a woman singing. It only lasted for about 5 minutes as I drove through, and I was going about 60 miles an hour at that point. I thought maybe my radio was cross-connecting with something. The next time I drove through, that sound changed again. I slowed down this time and stopped for a sandwich so I could listen more closely. This time, the sound was a terrible scream, like a girl screaming. I just couldn't chalk it up to coincidence or leave it alone. It was just too odd. I walked myself right up to the police station and kept persisting until they sent an officer out to take a listen. When I turned on my radio that time, all I heard was radio static. They all rolled their eyes and laughed at me, but I knew this was real. When I got back in my truck alone, I heard it again. This time it was a scream that sounded like a song. I truly don't know. I drove all around that whole county trying to pinpoint where the sound was stemming from. When I got outside the borders of the town, my radio would get fuzzy, and I'd start to hear the usual calls from other truckers. I found myself following as the sound got louder and louder, as I approached this empty factory. This was the place that I guess went out of business. Now, I don't know what's going on in there, but it's gotta be something that the police know about, because as I approached those front gates, I spotted the same officer that went to listen to the radio with me parked right outside. I have no idea why he'd act like he didn't know where the sound was coming from. But did he lie right to my face? I don't want to get myself in any kind of trouble, so I figured I'd best stay away for a while. Better not to stick my nose in where it don't belong. When I drive through, I still turn my radio up, and each time I hear something new. Sometimes screams, sometimes shrieks, sometimes whispering or beeping, or a combination of every sound imaginable. I don't know. I just don't know. I have a feeling that the police over there must know more than what they're letting on. I'll keep you updated if I see, or more likely hear, anything else. Thanks for doing what you do. Hi, Donovan. When I was a teenager, I worked at a restaurant that was in an old farmhouse. The bartender, the busboy, and the owners had all told me that the house was haunted. And even some of the longtime diners had stories about encounters with a ghost that supposedly lived there. The odd thing was that the ghost didn't seem to want to scare anyone. It tried to be helpful. A missing kitchen tool would suddenly appear on the counter in plain sight. A misplaced set of keys would show up under the diner's table after 3 different people had looked in that spot. A kid would suddenly be holding a toy that no one recognized. There were tons of stories like that, and everyone thought of the helpful ghost like a mascot for the restaurant. One day I'd gone into work early to do some deep cleaning. I broke the cardinal rule: never go in the basement fridge without letting someone know you were headed that way. The interior lever on the door was tricky, and if the door slammed shut behind you, you were stuck until someone released the door from the other side. Additionally, the basement had a very limited cell service. So there I was, completely alone in the place, which was not out of the ordinary. I often went in during off hours for deep cleaning and prep work. I realized that we were out of lemons in the kitchen, so I headed downstairs to grab some. My boss never needed to know I had gone downstairs without a buddy. Big mistake. I sent the block that we used to prop the door open skidding across the floor. Without thinking, I went after it, and then heard the door slam behind me. I immediately knew I was in trouble. Not only was it super cold in there, but my boss was going to be super upset with me. She reminded us constantly that we needed to go to the fridge in pairs. I checked my cell phone, no surprise I had no signal. I then got to thinking about how it would be several hours before anyone else would show up, and even longer before someone realized I was missing or headed downstairs for supplies. I thought through my options, which were 0. I just had to wait it out, freezing in my t-shirt and shorts. My teeth started chattering. It was really cold. I started pacing to keep myself warm, occasionally holding my phone over my head to check for a signal. I only needed 1 bar, but none ever appeared. On what seemed like my 200th lap of the fridge, I had my back to the door when I heard the distinctive thunk of the door handle being pushed from the outside. I whirled around expecting to see my angry boss or a confused coworker, but there was no one and the door was swinging open. I dashed out of the fridge into the hallway that led to the stairs. I looked around and called out but didn't see or hear anyone. I then ran upstairs. There was no one in the kitchen or the dining room or at the bar. When I peeked out the window, mine was the only car in the lot. And then it hit me, our ghost. It's all I could figure at that point. But the only answer I could come up with was that our helpful ghost had let me out of that fridge, sparing me hours in the cold and also from the horrifying possibility of having to pee in a corner. I never told anyone about my experience because I didn't want to get into trouble. But I never laughed at anyone again now. To have a story to tell that a lot of people will think is fake. But I can swear right now this actually happened. I have a small farm in Townsend, Delaware. Just some chickens and corn to sell. And we keep a cow for our own use, plus a medium-sized garden to feed our family. That's in Newcastle County, about a half hour from Battery Park. Lots of farms out here. We had been having some trouble with something getting into our chickens these past 6 months or so. I figured it was a fox managing to get under the fence. Couple times lately I'd go out in the morning to find a mess of feathers. Whatever got to the bird, it carried it off to eat. I've got a German Shepherd, but he's still mostly a pup, and I don't quite trust him to wander around loose. He stays in the house at night, but the night this had happened, we penned him up on the enclosed porch because he'd gotten into something that made him sick. Nothing serious, but I didn't want him messing up the house. So when he started carrying on around 2 in the morning, barking and whining, I wasn't sure if he just had to go do his business or if he saw something on the property. Either way, I had to get up and take him outside. I did grab my rifle though, thinking I might catch the fox in the act. The first sign I had that something was wrong was the way my pup was acting. He got out on the grass and sniffed the air, and then whimpered and didn't want to roam. Now usually he just races around like a goof, and I've got to keep whistling for him. But he just stayed near the side of the house and did his thing, then scampered back over to the porch. I let him back in knowing he had a time of it and just figured he still felt ill. While I was out, it made sense to walk out to the hen house and see if everything looked alright. It's a little bit away from the house. As I was heading over there, the cow started bellowing, which is really unusual for her. I decided to stop at the barn first. When I checked on her, she was alright, but really twitchy and all wide-eyed and nervous. I looked around good for a snake. That will spook a cow. I didn't see anything. I let her be and went on to the chicken pen. Once I had gotten 10 yards away, I could hear the hens fussing. Something had them all riled up, for sure. I threw the bolt on my rifle so I'd be ready to nail the fox if I saw him. I've got lights up over the pen, and the area was pretty well illuminated. There's 2 structures for the birds, and a small shed where I keep the feed. I looked through the fence and didn't see anything, but something had them squawking, so I unlatched the gate and went inside. As soon as I got in there, I could smell it. There was a strong scent of sulfur, like you just lit a match. I remember panicking for a second looking for a fire. I guess I just associated sulfur with fire. I wasn't even thinking about the fox now, just sniffing the air and trying to figure out what's that burning. Then I hear a squawk from a bird, and it's just cut short. It came from behind the feed shed. I stood still for a minute knowing that something had just killed a hen. I crept over there real easy with my rifle aimed coming around the corner. When I saw the thing, I almost dropped my gun, that's how shocked I was. It was crouched down low, huddled over the hen it had just caught. It was just as big as a calf, with a goat's head and curved horns. And there were damn wings on its back, like something out of a storybook. I just froze, forgetting about the gun in my hand. The thing looked up and I swear it looked evil. Glowing yellow eyes in its head, all bony and rigid. It was holding that dead hen in these little front legs like you see on a T-Rex, skinny with talons. The thing screeched at me and the sound was like something straight out of hell, like a cross between an angry giant bird and the scream a cougar makes. I stumbled back and fell on my ass, dropping my gun. Then I scrambled up as quick as I could, scared to pieces it was going to attack me. I snatched up my rifle and pulled the trigger, shooting like a crazy man, not even taking time to aim. The thing took off. It actually flew. These giant bat wings just unfolded, and it launched into the air carrying the hen. I saw its legs then, hawked like a horse's, and it had a skinny whip-like tail. The thing didn't rise too high, maybe it couldn't. It went about 15 feet up and then flew straight away, not any higher. I shot at it one more time, but I know I missed. I really didn't have much of a chance. Well, I guess I did, but I blew my chance falling on my ass. I went out the next morning looking for something to prove what I saw. There were signs of a scuffle behind the shed, and some tracks in the dirt that looked like hooves. But it's been dry and they didn't imprint very well. I took pictures, but you can't really tell what you're looking at. I decided I'm going to get a security camera that's motion activated installed on my property. I'll set it up in the chicken pen and maybe I'll get lucky and get a picture. If I do, I'll send it to you, Donovan. Then I'll have proof there's something weird out here in Delaware farm country. I went to college in Seattle in the early 2000s. I had gotten a fair number of scholarships, so I wasn't too worried about the cost of school itself. But the price of textbooks was a lot more than I had planned. This led me to start looking for a job. I never had a real job before, so it took a few interviews to secure a position. My resume was a little thin at that point. I landed a gig as a barista at a coffee shop, a couple blocks from the waterfront, kind of near the ferry. It was almost in Pike Place Market, but not the one of the cool spots that got a lot of traffic. The shop was on the bottom level of a building that housed a number of businesses. There is a print shop on the corner on our same street level, and on the floors above were offices and a couple of apartments at the very top level. I think the offices were for some sports company and a boating company that operated nearby, but had overgrown their building right on the water. That's what I gathered, at least, after working there for a few months. It was January. I had come back early from winter break to pick up a couple shifts, and honestly to escape my extended family that had invaded my parents' house. I guess the timing doesn't really matter that much, except to tell you that it was winter. It was me and one other barista closing up the shop after an incredibly long, boring day. I think we had maybe 10 or 15 customers across my 6-hour shift. Anna Marie, the other barista, was counting the till. She was the shift manager and so handled the money at the end of the day, and had to walk it down the block to the night deposit. I wiped down half a dozen tables and stacked the chairs, mopped like usual, restocked the beans, and made each of us a final cup of coffee for the road. Split and bagged up the scones that were left over for Anna Marie and I to take home. Really the best perk of the closing shift. I bagged up the trash cans, which was easy since we had so few customers. I took those out back to the alley, propping open the door with a spare crate. It looked like it had snowed a little, which wasn't surprising. There were warnings of an upcoming snowstorm. I think it ended up dumping 2 or 3 feet that night. On my way back from the trash, I circled down into the basement where the overstocked refrigerator was. I pulled 3 milks from the fridge and reached down for a 4th. I had perfected a carrying method, but it was precarious. As I managed to grab the final gallon with one finger, I heard this weird sound from deeper in the basement. We never went on that side of the basement. In fact, there was an unfinished wall that blocked off a good 2/3 of it all. We'd been told not to go down there because of flood damage had exposed old pipes, and they didn't want us to get tetanus or something. It sounded like trickling water, and when I play it back in my mind even now, there is this faint laughter somewhere in the mix. It wasn't even creepy, it sounded like a normal laugh, but there shouldn't have been someone in the basement laughing. That was the creepiest part. I stood there for who knows how long, probably only a few seconds, before turning to go back upstairs. The sound had stopped, and I thought I'd try to convince myself that maybe I just imagined it. I was halfway up the stairs, my attention focused on trying to balance the 4 gallons of milk. I was out of practice since I hadn't had a shift for a couple of weeks. I lost hold of a container and it had fell, bouncing down the steps as it broke open and gushed milk down the entire stairwell. I heard someone say, "Ow," as the milk hit the ground at the bottom of the stairs behind me. I kid you not. That was enough for me. I didn't want to meet whoever was chilling in the basement having a laugh. It was downtown Seattle, so there was always the possibility of random people around. I ran the rest of the way up the stairs and slammed the door behind me, double locking it. I never understood why there was a lock on that door to begin with, but thinking back, maybe there was a reason. I tossed the milks in the fridge under the counter. I saw that Anna Marie had already left with a night deposit, so I clocked out, grabbed my jacket, and headed out the back door to the alley. I walked up to that bus stop on 2nd and Lenora and went home. I didn't have another shift for a couple of days, so I started to forget what had happened in the basement. But a few days later, I had a last-minute opening shift filling in for another barista who was stuck at the airport in Detroit after their winter break. I got off the bus and made my way carefully down the hill. The snow had stuck around. The shop had actually been closed since my last shift because of that big snowstorm. As I rounded the corner to the front of the shop, I remembered I hadn't cleaned up the spilt milk and how awful that was going to be after it had been sitting there for a half a week. We were on the side street, so the snowplow hadn't come by yet. I stepped wrong and tripped face first into a pile of snow. I dug through with my foot to see what I'd tripped over. It turned out to be a zippered bag from the night deposit. It was locked and it still had money in it, but not very much. There hadn't been that many customers that day. I got to the front and there was glass everywhere on the street mixed in with the snow. The windows were totally shattered and the door was kind of smashed up. I was more nervous at that point and yelled into the shop to see if anyone was inside. I didn't get a response. I crept inside. The door was only open with one hinge, so I had to pick it up and set it aside. The snow had blown in and frozen to the tiled floor. The coffee beans were everywhere and the machines were ripped apart. The tables and chairs were thrown around. I looked back through the smashed windows and could see a couple of chairs on the other side of the street, half buried in the snow. The basement door, I swear to God I had locked it, was standing open. The doorknob was twisted off and the bolt was splintered out. I clicked on the light, and all the way down the stairwell were these streaks of these weird sparkly slime on the walls, and steps which mixed into the frozen puddle of milk at the bottom. I don't know why, but I touched the slime. It stuck to my hand and there was this gritty texture to it. It reminded me of when my dad forced me to gut a fish and the scales had gotten everywhere. It had the same consistency. I went further downstairs. The unfinished wall had been pushed over and there was a giant hole in the wall with pipes bent in every direction. I ran back upstairs and I called Anna Marie to see if she was okay. She answered her phone and told me that when she went to deposit the cash, someone had hit her from behind, and she woke up face first in the snow about 30 minutes later. She said she was so disoriented that her boyfriend had to come and pick her up. She didn't notice any of the windows being broken at that point. I hung up with her and I called my boss, who had been in Punta Cana for the last week, and I told him what was going on. Fast forward a few weeks after that, the police finally did investigate and it looked like the perpetrator came through that wall in the basement. But what in the hell is strong enough to break a concrete wall? The shop is back open now after the owner filed an insurance claim, but I quit a week after that incident, and especially after what happened to Anna Marie. In this episode, we're going to hear from a park ranger in South Carolina, and we'll find out why he is warning us to be cautious when entering the woods. Then we travel to Northern California, where a group of firefighters all experience something out of this world. Then we end up in Colorado, where someone sees something so big they can't believe it. But before we get into the stories, forget it. You all know the drill. Let's just get to the stories. Hi, Donovan. I'm not going to sign my name to this because I'm afraid I might lose my job. I'm a park ranger near Clemson, South Carolina. I'm only sending you this because I think people have the right to know what's out there. There's a cluster of parks here in what we call the Mountain Bridge Wilderness. It includes Tables Rock, Caesar's Head, and Jones Gap State Parks. I'm not going to tell you which one this happened in, but they're all pretty close together. I think people should be careful in all of them. First off, I'm not the only person who saw this. The reason I was on this particular trail was because a hiker reported seeing something unusual. He was pretty rattled, but very vague. We all figured it was a hoax of some sort, so I was assigned to investigate it, and had to hike 6 miles out on a trail that ends at a waterfall. This is a pretty rough hike, and not very well traveled. Honestly, we have so many waterfalls in this area. People seem to prefer going to the ones that have easy access and end in a shallow pool where their kids can swim. This waterfall is pretty, but it's not very big, and it's not very popular. I was looking forward to the assignment. I'm not one for hanging out at the ranger's office or patrolling campsites to make sure no one's breaking the rules. I usually volunteer if there's a job that takes me out further into the woods, like trail maintenance and stuff. So I was hiking this particularly steep stretch before you get to the falls, when some rocks started sliding. Not like a rock slide disaster, just a bunch of smaller rocks and debris cascading down from above me on the trail. We had a lot of deer and some black bears here. And that sort of phenomena is usually caused by a large animal up ahead. So, thinking it might be a bear, I proceeded with caution. I got to the top and looked around before I headed west in the direction of the falls. It's rare to see anyone up here, so I wasn't surprised to see the area was deserted. I was ready to take a load off, so when I got to the falls, I found a nice shady flat rock and sat down with my water bottle, figuring I earned a break. I was planning to scout the area afterwards and then head back down. I'm just sitting there thinking about my day when I heard something crashing through the brush on the other side of the falls. The woods are pretty thick back there. I stayed still and quiet, figuring some wildlife was coming to take a drink. Oh, it was something coming to take a drink, but it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. I kid you not, this thing looked almost like a deer, but only if the deer had died and started to decay. Its head was just bone, a skull with empty eye sockets, but it was definitely alive and moving, not to mention huge. I know anyone else would think I was a lunatic, but I've heard you read a few stories on here before, so I can speak plainly. This thing was dead and somehow alive. You could smell the decaying flesh on its body and see bones poking through here and there on its neck. It had lowered its head to the water like it was going to take a drink, and I'm sitting on the other bank, too scared to even breathe. All I could think was, this can't be real. Then it saw me. It lifted its head and those empty eye sockets and just pointed straight at me. And suddenly I see the red inside, glowing like coals on a campfire. I totally panicked, knowing this thing was some kind of evil. I jumped up and ran. But then I heard a big splash. I turned around, but I was afraid that the thing had jumped into the shallow water and was chasing me. I flew down that trail, crashing into limbs and scraping my face, trying to keep my balance on all the loose rocks. I'm lucky I didn't fall off the mountain and get seriously hurt. By the time I got maybe a mile and a half away, I slowed down and listened. I didn't hear anything behind me. I can't explain what that thing was, but I know what I saw. Maybe it was some kind of evil spirit, although you couldn't see through it. Or maybe there's just creatures out there that we never see, because they've gotten so good at hiding. I also don't know if it was intending to hurt me. Was it chasing me? Seemed like it, but who's to say? There was an undeniable aura of, I guess you'd say, evil around it. I know I never want to meet up with it again. I didn't report it, maybe that sounds cowardly, but I don't need to lose my job over this, or get told I need to see a shrink. I do think that people should be cautious going into the woods, any woods, and especially that area of South Carolina. There's danger out there. Danger in a form of which you never expect. Please be safe, everyone, and don't hike alone. I was a volunteer firefighter when those really bad wildfires hit Northern California. I'm actually from Idaho, but they flew me and some of my friends down there to help out because the blaze was so out of control. It's just unimaginable destruction and made me really sad to see all of those homes and neighborhoods totally destroyed. They had us camping a good distance away from any of the fires, and every night someone was on watch and radio. We were always on high alert because with the change in wind, miles could easily burn in minutes. I had been there for a week, maybe a week and a half. We had just pulled a 15 or 16 hour day, and we were finishing up dinner, so probably close to 11 or 12 at night. This guy Casey comes running over and tells us to follow him to the back of camp. I mean, back of camp is generous because that group had maybe 25 or 30 tents. We followed him to where these train tracks were. He was yelling about some weird sound he heard while he was taking a leak. I couldn't hear anything and neither could anyone else. But Casey was never like this. He was super chill and never made a big deal about anything. I think he was an English teacher or something at one point. I didn't know him super well. I had only worked with him once before. He ran down the train tracks. It was getting dark, but the fires were keeping it somewhat lit out so you could still sort of see what was happening. There was an overall glow to the situation. Casey had a pretty big head start on us, and we soon lost him in some trees up ahead. It was sometime right around then when the wind decided to change. The fire got to us quickly. But you see, the thing is, the fire was there way too fast. It should have taken an hour at least to make the distance that it did. But somehow, all of a sudden, everything was blazing. The trees, the grass, even the wood of the railroad tracks. I saw that the metal of the railroad tracks was also on fire. None of this was normal. Everything was happening too fast. We were surrounded on every side by walls of fire and it was closing in on us. I looked up and the flames were above us too. I thought I was imagining it at first, but then Nancy, one of the other ladies on the team, started yelling through the roar of the fire. "Do you hear that?" It was a strange cross between a hiss and a hum. It was deep, but at the same time it was high-pitched. I could feel it under my skin. The fire brightened up where Casey had disappeared. The ground began to rumble when I realized the hissing was now coming from below. A giant sort of fireball exploded upwards in front of us. The fire around us grew lower except for in front of us where it grew even brighter. I saw what looked like the outline of a person deep in the fire. I thought it was Casey, but the closer I looked, the stranger it appeared. It was hard to tell, but it was probably 7 to 8 feet tall. There was no way someone could withstand that heat either. It was impossible. The shrieking humming grew louder and I realized the creature was running towards us. Its front limbs were long and swinging until it got closer, and then I felt like it was reaching. I dove out of the way. The flames were trailing with it. It could have been the source of the fire. The second before I blacked out, I rolled over and I got a glimpse of its legs, which looked like hind legs of an animal, maybe a horse or a goat or something like that. I woke up and I didn't know how long I had been out, but it must have been for a while because it was starting to get light out and not just from the nearby wildfires. The sun was coming up and I could see I wasn't the only one who passed out. Nancy and some of the guys were nearby on the ground too. I checked on them all and they were all alive and breathing, but still out. I looked around and saw a giant hole where the railroad track had been. Some of the metal had sort of melted and dripped down the side of the hole. It looked like icicles. I went to the edge of the hole, which was more like a pit, probably at least 10 or 15 feet deep. The sides of it were caked in ash. Turning around, I realized that nothing actually had been burned. The track had melted a bit. A few feet on either side of the pit were a little charred, but everything else was unburned. Green grass and weeds and the trees were still covered in needles and the trunks were untouched. There was a stripe or maybe a patch of grass that had been kind of burnt. It went from the pit over the hill in the direction of the wildfires. Once everyone woke up and determined nobody was badly hurt, we searched for 3 or 4 hours but couldn't find any sign of Casey. I'm not sure what we saw, but we all saw it. Hi Donovan, I appreciate the opportunity to send this to you. I've tried to bring it up before, but it just felt too weird. I'm from Colorado. I was born and raised here, mostly around Denver. I never felt comfortable in the city, so I moved up towards the mountains when I got out of college. I got my civil engineering degree at CU Boulder. Boulder has a reputation for some pretty hippy-dippy types, but I was never one of those. I enjoyed my time there, but on weekends when everybody was partying, I'd head for the hills with my tent. I got to know some good out-of-the-way spots. So I'm used to the critters that are around in the mountains. I see deer and elk all of the time. The coyotes won't bother you. People can be scared of them, but personally, I like listening to them at night. Just one time I had this scary situation with a mountain lion. It was just before sunset and I was coming back from a hike. And then all of a sudden it was just there in front of me on the trail. What you're supposed to do is make noise and make yourself look big and tough, and slowly back away. Somehow I managed to remember those things even though I was really freaked out. It stared at me for a good long time, but then it just made this kind of snuffling noise and then turned away like I wasn't even worth bothering with. All that to say, I'm no stranger to the comings and goings of the resident creatures. We managed to coexist just fine. After I finished my degree, I was hired to work on the old Moffat Tunnel. It's a railroad and water tunnel that cuts through the Continental Divide in north-central Colorado. So it's pretty high up there, almost 10,000 feet above sea level. It was given a National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark designation, so I was honored to have a chance to work with it. I got an 18-month contract to work on the restoration. I stayed up there in an old cabin. Everybody else preferred to go back down at the end of the day, so I was alone a lot. It was great, working hard during the day and having peace and quiet and starry skies at night. It's not for everybody, but I loved it. On the weekends, though, a lot of times these crazy kids would come up there to party. The tunnel was some kind of magnet for them. The thing is 24 feet high, 18 feet wide, and 6 miles long. You can imagine the daredevil crap they got into. There are 15 trains a day that go through there. After I'd been up there for about 4 or 5 months, these carcasses started showing up near the tunnel entrance. At first, I'm like, these things are getting hit by the trains? But when I got a closer look, they obviously had been eaten with just remnants left behind. There got to be way too many of them just to be typical wild animal kills. I kept removing the piles of fur and bone and burying them as well as I could. I never saw any bears or even another mountain lion after that first one. For some reason, that area had become popular with the college kids as a place to come and do their acid trips. It gave them a real charge to get high and watch the train speeding by. I was worried one of them was going to go too far and do something stupid. I sure wasn't prepared as a medic for full teenagers. They'd come in the late afternoon, then they would traipse around the woods acting like they were Robin Hood and his merry men. I'm not kidding you, that was their deal. When it got dark enough, they'd come close to the tunnel and wait. Apparently, the lights and sound from the trains would really send them into another dimension. They'd be gasping and laughing and howling and dancing for hours. I don't know how you manage to make that much emotion for so long. I've never tried it. One night, I tucked myself in bed in my cabin. It was midnight, and I could still hear them riding around out there, but I was almost asleep. Then I heard screaming. At first, I thought it was all part of the craziness, but no, this was a blood-curdling screaming. I jumped out of bed and into my pants and ran out there. They were all screaming and running in different directions. It was so dark I couldn't see why, but I smelled something powerful, like skunky. I'm thinking, are they smoking something out there? Then I could hear a train coming through the tunnel towards us. When the light came through, I saw the outline of this huge hairy beast. It was incredible, like 9 foot tall. The tunnel was 24 feet and this thing almost reached halfway up. It was growling loudly and obviously enraged by that crowd of kids. They scattered everywhere and I assumed that they all made it back to their cars. The train roared by and blocked off the sight of that beast. I ran to the cabin and locked myself in. There was no way that something could be that big. Have you heard of something like this out here in Colorado? It was like a Bigfoot or something. I thought they were mostly found in Oregon. After that, I started going back to town to sleep at night with the other workers. That was a little too much for me. Hello there, Donovan. I've been a fan of yours for a while now. I never really had a supernatural encounter, but after your episode on that neighborhood building in Northern Virginia, I figured I would send this in. My wife and I love the show. Here's my story. I've lived in Charlotte, North Carolina for quite some time now. Charlotte's a beautiful city with so much to do. We don't live far from Panther Stadium, and I get season tickets to all the games through my work. The restaurants around here are some of the best in the world, and I can't imagine living anywhere else. I only have a half-hour commute to work, and life's been pretty good to us overall lately. When I look out my kitchen window, I can see this industrial building with no signage or advertising. And I've often pondered what could possibly be going on inside of that building. At first, I figured it might be a food processing center or something like that. I can see cars coming 24 hours and walk my dog Baxter in a continuous loop trying to figure out what is going on in there. But security is tight, and there is a large gate outside the building where cars can come and go. There is a sign on the gate that says, "Scan your ID at the gate." so there's no way I could just walk in there and figure out what's going on. Another thing that's been bothering me is the fact that the building is always so dark. You can never see inside no matter what time of day or night it is. It's like the building is purposely trying to hide whatever is going on inside. And then there are the strange noises. Sometimes late at night I can hear this loud humming noise coming from the building. It's like a motor running loudly, but I can't figure out what it could be. It's weird and unsettling. My daughter has claimed to hear anguished screaming coming in that direction. But to be fair, that could be coming from anywhere. There are lots of people living around us. Still, I wouldn't count out that the screams came from the building. I don't know what's going on inside that building, but there are some things that aren't right about it. I feel like there may be something illegal happening inside, and I worry about what could happen if investigated further. But at the same time, I can't help but to be curious about what's going on behind those blacked out windows. My friends always think I'm being crazy when I mention the building and they roll their eyes at me. I know I talk a lot about it, but something weird is going on in there. I just know it. My neighbors all have varying opinions about what the facility could be. A couple have told me it's a drug processing plant. A few others speculate that it's a headquarters for a secret government organization. I was having some wine with a neighbor one night who confessed she believed it to be a front for a large-scale illegal weapons operation. My wife jokes with me that it's a covert operations center for a major intelligence agency, but that has been one of the more plausible explanations that I've heard. An older woman who lives nearby said it was an alien contact center, where they were receiving instructions from outer space about how to invade Earth. My daughter is convinced it's a center for human cloning or gene manipulation experiments. Besides the screams that she's heard, she's also claimed to see strange men in lab coats escorting non-human entities around the building. She says the windows of the building are blacked out so nobody can see the illegal tests and experiments that they're running in there. Apparently, her friend on the school bus has a dad that works at that building, and he's not allowed to talk about what's going on in there. Every time I think I'm being paranoid, I talk to my daughter and I'm relieved that I'm not the only one. My wife won't entertain it and becomes incredibly irritated when I mention the building now. I guess I've talked about it too many times. I'm not the only one who views this building as something out of the ordinary. I was finally about to get a confession out of one of my neighbors after a couple glasses of wine. He was visibly shaken as he recounted the story to me. I could see the terror in his eyes, and he kept looking around him to make sure nobody else was listening. He said that he saw a van pull up to the building one night, and then saw a man with a cloak over his head and his arms behind his back fall out of the truck. The man got up and started running, and another man in a suit hit him over the head and threw him in the back of the van. The van disappeared into the building, and my neighbor called 911. The operator said they were coming right away, but no police ever showed up. My neighbor worries that he's on some sort of government list now because of what he saw. He made me promise not to tell anyone, but how could you not tell people about a story like that? What horror is going on in that building so close to me and my family? Sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy, but your show keeps me sane, Donovan. There are unexplained phenomena in this world, and if we don't keep investigating, we'll just live in fear and never know anything for certain. I'm looking forward to the next episode. Hey Donovan, you inspired me to write today. I've only told my closest family this story, nobody else. My dog Gunner was my best friend. Gunner was the best dog that I'd ever had. He was always happy and always seemed to know when I needed some cheering up. He would always come over and lay his head on my lap, and before I knew it, I was smiling again. There were so many things that I loved about Gunner. He was always so happy. Even if something bad happened, he would always wag his tail and try to make the best of it. Secondly, he was always so gentle. He never once bit or growled at anyone, even when other dogs were trying to start a fight. He was always so smart, too. He learned how to do so many tricks, and he always seemed to understand what I wanted him to do without any trouble. I could go on for hours about how great Gunner was, but I think the most important thing is that he made me happy. Whenever I was feeling down, he would come over and make me feel better. He was truly my best friend, and I miss him dearly. One night he ran into the woods and I spent hours trying to find him. It was such a traumatic night for me and I really don't even like writing about it. I had been walking for hours calling my dog's name. He had run off into the woods earlier that day and I was determined to find him. As the sky grew darker and darker, I began to worry. What if I never saw my best friend again? It was pitch black as I scoured the woods with my flashlight looking for Gunner. I had been calling his name relentlessly for hours, but there was no response. I brought a bag of treats with me in hopes that he would see them and come running back to me. However, no matter how long I searched or how loudly I called him, Gunner was nowhere to be found. The woods were quiet and creepy. Every sound made my heart jump, and I constantly scanned the darkness for any sign of my furry friend. Time seemed to be standing still as I wandered through the trees, calling out Gunner's name. Finally, after hours of searching, I had to admit defeat. I went home heartbroken, not knowing if I would ever see my best friend again. The next day I returned to the woods with my parents. We scoured every inch of those woods but still couldn't find Gunner. We put up flyers and contacted all the local animal shelters, but no one had seen him. For weeks we searched tirelessly for my lost dog, but he was nowhere to be found. Finally, one day out of desperation, we placed an ad on Craigslist offering a $500 reward for anyone who could find Gunner. A few nights later, we received a call from someone who spotted him in a nearby park. We drove over there immediately, but the dog they found wasn't Gunner. Devastated, I headed back to the house and figured I would take one last look in the woods before saying goodbye to my friend. I got my flashlight, a bag of his favorite treats, and I headed out. The woods were just as eerily quiet as the night I'd searched for Gunner. I screamed for him as loud as I could as I walked deeper and deeper into the woods. I continued to call his name, but there was no answer. The only sound I could hear was the crunch of leaves under my feet. I was about to finally give up when I saw some sort of creature lying on the ground. My heart sank. Was this Gunner's lifeless body on the ground? I walked slowly towards him, preparing to say my last words. My eyes were filled with tears, heartbroken at what I thought was Gunner. The closer I got to the creature, the more I began to doubt it was Gunner. Was it a dead deer or something else decaying in the woods? It appeared very skinny and tall and gray in coloration. I assumed it had lost all its hair, but the closer I got, I realized it didn't have any hair at all. Was this a dead person in the middle of the woods? I started shaking as I got closer. It had pale, thin skin and looked somewhat human. As I stood directly over the body, shining the flashlight down on it, I saw that it was completely naked and almost skeletal in appearance. I felt nauseous that this thing wasn't human. Suddenly, this thing turned its head and looked right at me, and started making this unnerving clicking noise. It had hollow black eyes with no nose and a giant mouth. I immediately turned around and ran as fast as I could back to the house. I had never seen anything like that in my life, and that clicking noise it made still haunts me. To think that this thing is just lurking in the woods next to my house is enough for me to vomit. After wondering what the hell that thing could be, I discovered some articles about a creature called the rake. I started reading all of the accounts of people who have claimed to have seen one. In doing so, I noticed that there were some patterns in the stories. Many people claimed that a rake had hollow black eyes and was terrifying in nature. I also read accounts of people who have harmed themselves after claiming to encounter one. In many of these cases, the victims had left behind a note which described the creature in great detail. Humanoid, pale skin, unnaturally skinny and tall, black hollow eyes, and no nose. I don't know for certain if that's what I saw, but what keeps me up at night is that my beloved dog might have been killed by that creature. That disturbs me deeply as he deserved a long life and a natural death. I miss Gunner every day, and I pray I never see that thing again. If any one of your viewers has seen anything similar, can you please let me know? My father was in the military, and my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. When I was about 3, we moved into an old farmhouse. My mom had got me a toy fire truck for my birthday, and I loved it. I would play with it all the time. It had lights that would come on when the wheels moved, and a loud siren that you could activate by pushing a button. It was my favorite toy. One morning I had gotten up early and was playing with my toys on my parents' bedroom floor. My mom was really tired, and she asked me to play quieter so that she could sleep for a couple more minutes. Being only 3, I said yes, but kept playing as I had been. Finally, my mom got up and took the fire truck from me, to take the batteries out and give it back to me to play with silently. To her confusion, she saw that there were no batteries in the fire truck. Being exhausted, she gave me back the toy and tried to get some sleep. As soon as I started playing with the fire truck again, the lights came on and the siren was sounding at full volume. This freaked my mom out and she led me out of the bedroom. That night, my dad got home and my parents started discussing their day. My mom explained the incident with the fire truck to my dad, who immediately laughed it off, put it on the ground and told me to play with it. The second my hands touched it, the lights and siren went off. My dad took the fire truck outside, grabbed a baseball bat, and began to repeatedly smash it into oblivion. I was too young to remember any of this, but apparently when my dad got back inside, I told him in a serious tone that Lily was displeased that he broke her fire truck. My mom and dad looked at each other in horror when I said that. Later that night, they put me to bed and laughed it off as an imaginary friend and simple glitch with the fire truck. After everyone went to bed, my parents woke up to a strong smell of smoke. Certain that the house must be on fire, they picked me up and rushed me out of the house in a panic and called 911. The firefighters came, but there was no fire or even smoke in the house. I don't know what happened. A couple weeks later, my grandparents came to visit. We were all eating dinner one night, and my grandmother told me that she has a surprise for me. I jumped up and down, excited, screaming, "What is it? What is it?" My grandmother laughed and said, "Eat everything on your plate and I'll give it to you." After eating everything, even the vegetables I hated, I crawled up into my grandmother's lap and said, "All done." My grandfather got up and went into the next room to get my surprise. "I know your other one broke, so I got you a fire truck, sweetie," my grandmother said to me. I was ecstatic. It wasn't going to be the same toy, but I was going to have a fire truck again. Apparently, I started squealing in excitement and running around the room in a frenzy. 5 minutes passed and my grandfather didn't return from the bedroom. "Hang on, sweetie, let me help your grandfather find your present," my grandmother said as she left the room. After about 5 more minutes, my grandparents both came into the living room empty-handed. "I must have left it in the car," my grandfather said, and headed out the front door. "I'll help you look," my dad said, and quickly took off after him. They were probably out there 10 minutes when they came inside empty-handed. My grandfather looked flabbergasted. "I was looking forward to seeing you play with your new fire truck," my grandfather told me. "Oh, we probably forgot it at home. We will bring it to you next weekend, sweetie," my grandmother said. My mom laughed and said, "Don't worry, he has enough toys." I was visibly upset, but I quickly forgot about it, and we all sat spending time with each other in our living room. About a half hour later, a strong burning smell started to emanate from the kitchen. "I must have left the oven on," my mom said as she ran into the kitchen. My grandmother followed her quickly to help. A few seconds later, we heard shrieks coming from the kitchen. My mom ran out to inform my dad of the situation. Before she could utter a word, I said, "Lily is displeased. She liked the other fire truck better." "How did?" my mom started. My grandmother ran into the room and yelled, "The fire truck is in the oven. Why would you put it in there, Frank?" My grandfather looked confused. "I didn't put the damn thing in there." "Well, who did?" Shortly afterwards, we moved out of that house. Dad got stationed somewhere else and we went from state to state. I haven't had any paranormal experiences since, and I was too young to remember those events. But my family is still haunted by the experience in that house. My mom did some research and learned that a little girl had died in a house fire on that property several years before we got there. Could that be Lily? Is Lily's spirit the reason the fire truck worked without batteries? Did the spirit of Lily cause the house to reek of smoke? Did Lily put that fire truck in the oven? So many unanswered questions, but one thing is for sure, my entire family is happy to be out of that house. I don't think I received any more fire truck toys after that either, but I turned out all right. I had to share my story with you, Donovan. Thanks and take care. Hey Donovan, I have a story for you. I would rather not say exactly where I live, but it's in the southeastern part of the United States, near a national government laboratory. Many of the employees at the laboratory are not allowed to talk about the projects they are working on outside of work. However, it's not uncommon to corner an uncle or a friend that is employed there and try to weasel information out of them. They will sometimes drop tidbits or even tell crazy things that are not classified. One night, after an uncle of mine had a few too many drinks, he started talking about this creature they kept at the lab. He described it as stickly, thin, bone-like, and bald. He said its eyes were too big for its head, and its hands and feet had long, bony appendages. He said he had seen it deep in an underground bunker located under the lab. My uncle was an architectural engineer. He had been called in to determine the structural integrity of a bunker. According to him, the government had built the shelter during World War II, and whatever was being kept there was breaking it down. My uncle had been led deep into the complex and down several tunnels until he arrived at the bunker. He said the bunker resembled a bank vault, like those from old bank heist movies. He said the escorts had instructed him not to look at the back of the structure, just the interior section tied to the hallway. At first, he said nothing stood out, but then he looked up and saw evidence that something dangerous was being kept inside the bunker. He said that there were claw marks deep into the walls. He was baffled because the bunker was made of thick concrete and steel. He said it would be impossible for a human or a wild animal to leave those marks on the wall. After examining the walls, he said aloud that they should still hold for several years. At his prognosis, he said he had heard a terrible sound from the back of the bunker. It sounded like a wail and a high-pitched screech in one. Without thinking, he quickly turned and peered into the back of the bunker. It was then that he spotted the creature. He said it was restrained in a seated position, so he could not tell its full height or size. He said the guards quickly rushed him from the room and had more guards posted in the front of the bunker. One guard escorted him back to the surface level and out of the tunnels. The guard took him to an office, and they repeatedly asked him questions about what he had seen. He said he knew better than to admit that he saw it. He kept repeating that it was dark and only saw the front of the room. The laboratory is surrounded by acres and acres of woods. Armed guards patrol the perimeter, and signs are posted everywhere that it is a violation to cross the boundary. And many employees have told me that snipers are scattered throughout to stop intruders. Hunters occasionally drift near the perimeter, but no one crosses it. However, one side of the lab is a rural highway. It goes directly along the side of the border. It is a narrow 2-lane road that locals use only to reduce their commute time. On this road late one night, I saw some strange lights floating above the road directly ahead. As my car approached, the lights seemed to be the same distance ahead. I began to have wild ideas, but then quickly smashed them for the thought of someone has a drone. Yep, some kid has a new birthday present. Then the lights started to speed up and move from side to side. I wasn't sure what to think at that point. The next thing I know, the lights do this wild swirl and then nosedived into the woods up ahead to my left. Next, as if they had been following or chasing this object, a surge of lab police vehicles swarmed the wooded area. They didn't seem to notice me in my little black Civic in all of the commotion. I heard the worst noise when I came closest to the spot on the road to where the lights crashed. It was this screeching wail. My windows were up and the noise was still off the charts. I pushed my foot on the gas and quickly passed the commotion and made it off the remote road. For weeks I watched the local news and listened for any indication that something had happened on that remote road. Yet nothing was ever said. In my mind, that noise came from a creature like the one my uncle had seen trapped in a bunker years ago. I don't know if it was the same creature or its companions that had come to rescue it, but I went from a skeptic to a believer. Thanks, Lynn. Hi there, Donovan. Thanks for getting this content out to the people. My strange encounter happened about a year ago. I know this story is not one of your typical encounters, but it happened. I have seriously been shaken ever since. I work at a national park in Kentucky. It's called Mammoth Cave. Mammoth Cave is a massive cave system currently known as the most extensive cave system in the world. It has over 420 miles of explored tunnels. It is still expanding. The portion outside the cave is a large park as well. It's a great place to take the family on vacation. Families hike and kayak and explore the caves. However, as I say this, I also preface with being cautious of your time inside the cave. I have worked at many parks throughout my career. I have a niche in war history, specifically weaponry. Mammoth Cave was an exciting placement for me. The bats that live in the cave produce guano, bat poop, a key component in potassium nitrate, better known as saltpeter, used during earlier wars. Enslaved people were forced to mine it. Several artifacts from that period have been recovered from the cave. I am not one to typically believe in wild tales, but after my encounter I discovered your channel, hoping to make sense of what I saw. Honestly though, it has led me to believe that many things in our big world are unexplained. Anyhow, I digress. Part of working the caves means giving tours. Tours become monotonous quickly. Tourists are always asking the same questions and I'm giving out the same answers over and over. It's rinse and repeat. I always try to be engaging. It was Tuesday in the second tour that I had given that morning. I had a relatively large group of people. Part of the group was a family of 3, a mom, dad, and a girl about the age of 10. The family was relatively quiet, but seemed engaged throughout the tour. Of course, the cave comes with its legends. Some of these are spirits that haunt the cave, but I never gave this much thought. I never even considered that there was such a thing as a ghost. I would, of course, tell the stories in the hope of engaging my audience, but I had never seen anything to make me believe that there was any truth to it. As I led my group to the haunted chamber, I noticed the temperature had changed. The temperature change seemed odd because the cave keeps a consistent 54 degrees once inside and away from the entrance. Over my time working within the cave system, I had been accustomed to the temperature. I remember thinking that perhaps I was getting sick. As I began speaking to the group, the internal light system glitched. The lights were not going off, but they were dimmed. The lights dimming was unusual. During this, I glanced at the family standing before me to the right. The daughter suddenly pitched forward like someone had shoved her from behind. Her dad's quick reflexes saved her from a fall. I asked if she was okay, and she said someone had pushed her. The strange thing was, her family was to the side, and no one was behind them. I checked that she was okay and had my partner continue with the group while I attended to this family. As I leaned down in front of the girl, rocks started shuffling behind her. Small stones about the size of driveway gravel began rolling. The ground was unlevel in this chamber section, but not enough for the previously undisturbed stones to move. I told the family that we should catch up with the group and leave now. As we exited the chamber, I saw someone's back as they rounded a rock outcropping, thinking that this was another tour member trying to be funny by being disruptive with the historic site. I quickly returned to the area to confront them. Guess what, Donovan? Nothing. No one was there. The entire room was empty but for myself. There was nowhere someone could have hidden or gone to escape. I am nervous and anxious and a little sick at this point. I quickly caught up to the group, and luckily we were at the end of the tour. I took the rest of the day off and debated returning to work the next day. I'm unsure if it was the girl, the time we were there, or me. I have no idea, but there is truly something supernatural inside Mammoth Cave. Got a short story for you, Donovan, from my home in West Virginia. I live in a city in the north of West Virginia called Fairmont, but this happened at my buddy's hunting cabin in Berkeley County. Berkeley County is one of the easternmost counties of West Virginia, and it sits at the top of the Shenandoah Valley. The Shenandoah Valley is part of the Appalachian Trail. The trail is a hiker's paradise. It goes down the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's truly a beautiful area. My buddy has a hunting cabin that is pretty remote in this area. I believe it was family land handed down. He rarely goes, and the cabin had not been used at that time for a few seasons. When my buddy suggested that we take a long weekend to be mountain men, what we call hunting, fishing, and roughing it, I was all in. We packed light because the cabin does have some of the necessities like running water. The trip into the cabin was great. The views are truly unmatched. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon and settled in for the night. Everything in the cabin seemed to be in order as we quickly glanced about. Besides finding a snake in the woodpile, the afternoon was relatively uneventful. We were pretty beat and we went to sleep around dark, so it was probably around 9 p.m. Near 1 in the morning, something made a noise outside my room. It startled me awake. It sounded like something had fallen. Knowing that the cabin had not been in use and most likely wild animals had become comfortable coming close, I thought it was most likely a deer or a raccoon. I must have drifted off to sleep because when I startled awake again around 1:45, this time there was a loud boom. My buddy had woken up too. He was on the other side of the cabin. Both of us quickly grabbed our guns and a light. We tried at first to peer out of the little window in the cabin, but due to it being small and unclean, it was impossible to really see out. Then we decided to creep out and see what caused the commotion. As we slowly and quietly slid out the front door, we saw that the heavy wooden bench that sat out front had been tossed upside down about 5 feet away. The area is known to have bears and wild boar. The bears can be quite large, and the boar are just stupid destructive. Yet not a single creature was in sight. It was late and I was on edge. We decided it would be best just to hunker down for the night. The original plan was that we would get up super early Friday morning to hunt, but after the night we had, we decided we wouldn't go until after daylight. At daylight, we began poking around outside. We didn't realize it at first, but then we realized there were faint tracks all around the cabin. The tracks were odd. The creature was for sure not a bear or a wild boar. This thing had a foot span longer than a typical man's. We measured it about 14 inches long. It favored the outside of its feet, so a width measurement was impossible to get accurately. I wear a size 12 shoe, and it was easily wider and longer. The creature seemed to have toes or something. At this point, I started searching Google to see what type of tracks these could be. So my buddy and I decided to start having breakfast. He had brought a grill for us to cook on, so we went to the truck to dig it out. This quickly turned into some frantic hollering. During the night, whatever had flipped the bench had obviously helped themselves to most of the supplies in the back of the truck. The grill was still there, most likely due to it not being super portable, but our extra hunting gear had been taken. Our cooler was gone, and so were several of our knives. Luckily, we had brought all the guns inside when we arrived. We also had begun to entertain the idea that some druggy mountain people had stumbled upon us last night. It didn't exactly explain the bench, but it did the stealing. And then we had a decision to make. We could try to salvage what we could and stay till Sunday, the original plan, or we could take off. I was ready to leave, but I didn't want to admit it. My buddy still wanted to stay and do some exploring. I think he was sore about having been stolen from and was hoping to come across his stuff. After breakfast, we decided to do some scouting. We took off on foot with our hunting rifles. We had probably walked about 15 minutes when we approached the creek that borders one side of his property. We were ready to follow the creek for a bit when I spotted something orange across the creek. We waded through a narrow part of the channel and found that the orange item was my hunting safety vest. It looked like it had been dropped. At this point, my buddy wanted to continue in the direction the vest was left, to see if we could find the thieves. We continued on, but at this point I was getting a little spooked. Then my friend pointed out a cave, a huge open-mouthed cave. My buddy is all pointing and trying to whisper that the druggies might be hiding out there. Then something happened. A large creature, hunkered like a bear, moved to the mouth of the cave. It was on all fours, but its back was angled high. It was covered in this shaggy fur like a sheepdog would have. It was brownish and black. I couldn't see its face, only its back and a little bit of its side. At this point, it slowly started to rise. It kept rising, slowly lifting its large, heavy body. I was a good distance, but it was easily over 7 feet tall. It didn't have any clothing on, only shaggy, hairy fur. I stood completely still, afraid to move or even breathe. This thing stealthily moved into the cave. At this point, I am done. No amount of convincing would have kept me hanging around. I glanced at my buddy, and he was the same. As quietly as possible, we moved back towards the creek. We crossed and then ran back to the cabin. Without saying a word, we packed up our stuff and took off. It was probably about 10 minutes up the road when we finally began to really speak. We decided to stop by the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office was a laid-back place. Funny enough, it even had coffee and donuts sitting out on the counter when we went in. We asked to speak to someone in private about some items being stolen. I think we were obviously scared of what we would say when we began to speak. The receptionist walked us back to a small office. Sitting at the desk was an officer, and he asked, what could he help us with? I finally worked up the nerve and explained that we had been hunting at a cabin on the North Rim, and that we had been woken in the night to some items being stolen from our vehicle. He asked for a more specific location, and when we gave him a closer address, he began to smirk. He asked what we did after the items were stolen, and we described our morning. When I told him about the creature, he did put on a more serious face. In a drawl, he said, "You two are lucky. We have a bandit of sorts on that mountain. Most see evidence of him passing through, but very few have been able to catch a glimpse. Gentlemen, thank you for your time in Berkeley County, and have a safe trip home." Needless to say, the cabin has now been officially abandoned. My buddy hasn't been back, and as far as I know, no one else has. It's a story we tell friends, but no one ever believes us. I know what I saw, and there is a giant creature that lives in that cave.